On a hilltop in central Mexico stands a small yellow church. Visitors climb up for the view, then head back down. Almost none of them know the truth beneath their feet. The hill is not a hill. It is a pyramid. The largest pyramid ever built by human beings. Anywhere on Earth, greater in volume than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The people of this land raised it over more than 1,000 years. Then it vanished under grass and soil, and the empire that came built a church on top, as if to seal it shut. Go back more than 2,000 years, to the city of Cholula, in what is now central Mexico. This was one of the great cities of the ancient Americas. Lived in continuously for thousands of years, one of the oldest cities on the continent still inhabited today. And at its heart, the people began to build a mountain by hand. They called it Tlachihualtepetl, which means the made-by-hand mountain. It was a fitting name, because that is exactly what it was. Let the scale land. The Great Pyramid of Cholula has a volume of around 4.5 million cubic meters. The famous Great Pyramid of Giza, the one everyone pictures, has a volume of about 2.5 million. Cholula is nearly twice as large. By volume, it is not just the biggest pyramid in the Americas. It is the biggest pyramid on the planet. By some measures, it is the largest monument ever built by human hands anywhere in any age. Now it is not as tall as Giza. Giza rises in a sharp point, while Cholula spreads wide and low, about 25 meters high but enormous across. More than 1,000 feet on a side in its final form. It is a different shape of giant. Where the Egyptians built up into a peak, the people of Cholula built out into a vast platform mountain. But in sheer mass of material moved and stacked by human beings, nothing else compares. Here is the part that makes it remarkable. It was not built all at once, and not by one people. The Great Pyramid of Cholula is really many pyramids, built one on top of another, over more than 1,000 years. Each generation, each culture that held the city, added a new shell over the old one, like the layers of an onion. Builders raised it across the centuries, from a few hundred years before the Common Era well into the 9th century after. It grew by accumulation, 1,000 years of devotion stacked into one mountain of adobe brick. So who built it? This is where the honest mystery begins. Because it was raised by so many hands across so many centuries, no single people can claim it. Different cultures shaped it at different times. We do not have a clean, simple answer to the question of who the builders were, the way we might for a single tomb raised in a single reign. The pyramid is a collaboration across 1,000 years, and many of the names of those generations are lost. And then, at some point around the 9th century, the Great Pyramid was abandoned as a holy site. Why, we do not fully know. The city of Cholula lived on, but the mountain of brick was left. Over the following centuries, rain and plants did their work. Soil gathered. Grass and trees took root. The straight lines softened and disappeared under green. Slowly, the largest pyramid on Earth turned into what looked, to any passing eye, like an ordinary wooded hill. That is how the Spanish found it. When the conquistador Hernán Cortés and his men reached Cholula in 1519, they did not see a pyramid. They saw a hill with a temple on top. What happened next was a tragedy. At Cholula, the Spanish and their allies turned on the people of the city and killed thousands of them in a single bloody episode. One of the darkest events of the conquest, the massacre at Cholula, became infamous. If a buried wonder that refused to die is the kind of story you came here for, take a moment now and subscribe to Obsidian. This channel is sharper than the empire that buried it, and there is so much more they tried to cover over. And stay close, because what the Spanish did to the pyramid itself is the perfect symbol of the whole conquest. After the killing, the Spanish set out to plant their faith over the old one. Cholula had been a sacred city full of temples. The Spanish tore many down and raised churches in their place. And on the great hill, the buried pyramid, that they may not even have fully understood, They built a church near the summit, the Church of Our Lady of Remedies, a Catholic chapel crowning a hidden indigenous pyramid, the cross planted on top of the old gods, sealing them under stone and soil. You could not design a clearer image of what conquest tried to do: cover the old, build the new on top, make people forget what lay beneath. For centuries, that is exactly what happened. People prayed in the church, climbed the hill for the view, and had no idea that under their feet sat the most massive pyramid ever raised by human beings. But it was never truly gone, and in the 20th century, it came back into the light. Starting in the 1930s, archaeologists began to dig into the hill, and what they found astonished them. They drove tunnels straight into the mound, and inside they discovered the layered pyramids, shell within shell, the work of 1,000 years. Over time, they bored miles of tunnels through the structure, mapping the giant hidden within the hill. The largest pyramid on Earth had been there the whole time, waiting under the grass. Inside, they found more than brick. They found murals, painted by the ancient builders, including a famous one showing figures drinking from cups, a scene of feasting and ritual life from many centuries ago. They found altars, floors, and the bones of the pyramid's long history. Layer by layer, the hidden mountain began to tell its story again, after centuries of silence, and yet the mysteries remain. We still cannot say with full confidence which culture built which layer, or exactly why the pyramid was finally abandoned as a sacred place. We do not know all the rituals it hosted, or everything it meant to the people who poured 1,000 years of labor into it. The church still stands on top, so the pyramid can never be fully excavated. The largest monument on Earth keeps much of its story locked inside, beneath a chapel that will not move. The tunnels themselves are part of the wonder. To study a pyramid buried inside a hill, archaeologists could not simply uncover it, because a church and a town sat on top, so they dug into it instead. Over the decades, they bored kilometers of narrow tunnels straight through the structure, threading between the layered pyramids. Walk those passages today, and you move through 1,000 years of construction, one buried staircase and ancient wall after another, all hidden inside what looks from outside like a grassy hill. It is worth being precise about how it beats Giza. The Great Pyramid of Giza is taller and steeper, a sharp stone peak. Cholula is lower and far wider, a broad terraced mountain of brick. In height, Giza wins easily, but in sheer volume, in the total amount of material piled up by human hands, Cholula is the giant, holding nearly twice as much. It is a different kind of record, and by that measure, nothing humans have ever built is bigger. The ancient builders also left their art inside. Among the discoveries is a long mural, painted more than 1,500 years ago, showing rows of figures drinking from cups, a scene of feasting and ceremony. It is sometimes called the Mural of the Drinkers, and it stretches for many meters. These were not faceless laborers piling dirt. They were a people with art, ritual, color, and joy, and they painted their lives onto the very pyramid they raised. The massacre the Spanish committed at Cholula in 1519 was not a random act. Cholula was a sacred and important city, tied at the time to the Aztec power that Cortés was marching to conquer. Cortés, with thousands of indigenous allies of his own who were enemies of the Aztecs, struck first and struck hard, killing a huge number of Cholulans in the city center. It was a calculated act of terror on the road to the Aztec capital, and it left a permanent scar on the city. After the conquest, the Spanish set about replacing the old faith with the new, everywhere they could. Cholula had been dense with temples, and the Spanish raised churches across the city, often on or near the sacred sites they had torn down. The grandest gesture of all was the church on the great hill, crowning the buried pyramid. The pattern was deliberate. Build the cross where the old gods had stood, so that worship would continue in the same places, but for a new god. because that church is now itself a historic monument. The pyramid beneath it can never be fully uncovered. You cannot tear down a centuries-old church to expose the pyramid it sits on. So the largest monument on Earth remains mostly hidden, explored only through tunnels and partial digs. We know it is there, we have mapped much of it, but we will likely never see the whole thing in the open air. It is a giant that must stay mostly underground, and yet the hill is still sacred. Long after the conquest, people still climb it, still gather there, still hold festivals on and around the buried pyramid. The specific gods have changed, but the human pull toward this high holy place has never stopped. In a strange way, the pyramid is still doing its job, still a center of devotion. Thousands of years after the first basket of earth was laid, the whole structure was built from adobe, sun-dried mud brick, rather than the cut stone of Egypt. That choice fit the land and the materials at hand, and it is part of why the pyramid weathered into a hill so completely once it was abandoned. Mud brick, given enough rain and time, softens back toward the earth it came from. The disguise that hid the largest pyramid on Earth was, in a sense, built into the very bricks. Cholula is also one of the longest continuously inhabited cities in all of the Americas. People have lived here for well over 2,000 years, without a break through the rise and fall of empires and the trauma of conquest. The pyramid grew up with the city, layer by layer, generation by generation. It is not the relic of a vanished people. It is the deep root of a living town that is still here today. It helps to remember that Mesoamerican pyramids served a different purpose than the Egyptian ones. The pyramids of Egypt were mainly tombs, sealed monuments to dead kings. The pyramids of Mexico were mostly temples, platforms that lifted shrines toward the sky, climbed and used by the living for ceremony. Cholula was not built to bury a pharaoh. It was built to reach the gods again and again, for 1,000 years. Think of the labor across those centuries. Millions upon millions of bricks, each one made, dried, carried, and laid by hand. No metal tools, no wheels, no draft animals. Just generations of people choosing, over and over, to add to the mountain their ancestors began. The Great Pyramid of Cholula is not the achievement of one reign or one genius. It is the achievement of a whole society, sustained across 40 or 50 generations of Desher. So when you stand on that hill and look up at the little yellow church, hold both things in your mind at once. The conquest is up top, in stone and bell, and underneath, holding it all up, is the largest monument human beings have ever built, raised by the people the conquest tried to erase. The church did not defeat the pyramid. It is standing on it. Think about what this place really represents. The single largest pyramid ever built by human beings is not in Egypt. It is in Mexico. It was raised by indigenous peoples of the Americas, over 1,000 years, with nothing but human muscle and sun-dried brick. That fact alone should be famous the world over. Instead, for centuries it was hidden, overbuilt, and half forgotten, dismissed as a hill with a pretty church. But here is the defiant truth. They could bury it, and they could build on top of it, but they could not unmake it. The pyramid is still there. Every brick the ancient builders stacked is still in place, holding up the very hill the church sits on. The conquest planted its cross on the summit, and in doing so, it has spent 5 centuries unknowingly standing on the shoulders of the people it tried to erase. The made-by-hand mountain still carries the weight. The Great Pyramid of Cholula is a lesson in stone. You can cover a people's greatness with soil and grass. You can plant a new faith on the peak. You can let the world forget. And still, underneath it all, the achievement remains, too vast to truly destroy, waiting for someone to dig a tunnel and remember. The continent's greatest monument was hidden in plain sight, and it is still down there, sharper than the empire that buried it. This is the history they tried to cover over. If you want to keep digging it back up with me, Obsidian is just getting started. I will see you in the next one.